welcome to episode 44 of Lotus Chat Worldwide. And today you have myself, Jen, a fellow Lotus Lady, as well as our wonderful Lotus Lady, Jazzy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back.
And it's great to have you all back with us again this week, both on YouTube and to our listeners on Spotify. Thank you again for being a part of this journey with us. And yeah, episode 44, guys, we decided to do something a little different, and we are going to discuss a very important topic today called critical conversations, dealing with conflict. And I can only say that there is not one of us out there who probably hasn't had one of these type of conversations in the past. So first, let us go ahead and define what a critical conversation is. Jazzy, would you like to give a little more clarifying information about that?
Sure, why not? Critical conversations. It is definitely something that we have in a more frequent basis, especially when there are things that come up that need to be talked about. It could be something that's difficult to talk about, something that needs attention or expression around. So that way there could be a clear understanding. And sometimes they're not always the easiest. So the conversations that aren't the easiest, well, you guessed it, is definitely could be considered a critical conversation. So, and tonight we're going into 5 tips of what we do or what we can do to be able to resolve these conflicts and going in on these critical conversations that you might end up going through. And so let's just jump right in. So let's see. Would you like to share tip 1?
Sure. So we know that there are quite a few things you probably heard out there about the different ways that one can approach having or dealing with a very critical conversation. Some of the examples that Jazzy mentioned, such as when you're having a critical conversation in a relationship, a difficult one, let's say a difficult conversation with a parent, even a child. And we decided to put it down into these 5 tips that Jazzy mentioned, starting with tip 1, which is co-creating intentions together. Jazzy, this was a beautiful one that you mentioned, and I would love to hear your take on what that entails.
Okay, let's do that. So co-creating intentions. So say that you're person A and person B. You guys get together and it is stating that there's something that needs to be talked about. And so for example, if there was an issue going on with like a roommate, it's just bringing it up to be able to let them know that this is not going to be the easiest conversation to have. It may or may not be, but I'd like to set the space to come to an understanding and to be able to connect with you closer to also resolve these things that are coming up. And then I guess inviting them into the space of, is there anything that you'd like to put in this space before you go into that conversation? What I like to be aware of is setting a pre-frame. So also allowing the pre-frame to be a part of the intention. Just so that way everything can happen in a fluid motion, and it takes the edge off of feeling like you're about to go head to head with anyone.
So Jazzy, great explanation there. For our listeners and our viewers out there, when you say pre-framing, what do you mean by pre-framing?
Setting the tone before, letting them know what's about to happen before anything happens. So I'd like to talk to you about XYZ. And this is going to take this amount of time. Do you have that time? I just wanted to talk about my feelings that were coming up in that. So you're just kind of giving them a heads up of what you want to talk about beforehand without going into details first. And it also allows them to give you the permission to go into that conversation. You want to make sure that they're open to having that conversation with you.
Absolutely. And I love that you also mentioned the whole point of clearing space, which is a very important part of starting that conversation. Making sure that you pre-frame, and also that you define and examine where each of you is coming from emotionally when you start that conversation. looking at the situation, defining the context of that conversation, and also defining if there is any type of resistance involved with, that conversation. So in clearing that space and allowing for that communication to happen, and making sure that each of you is open to what, the beginning parts of that conversation, however it starts out. And I feel that's a very important part of this critical conversation that you're about to have with said person. So for example, and I'll give an example myself, when you clear space, let's say, for me, in regards to a very important conversation that I'm having with a parental figure. So I remember growing up, those times when you were having those very important conversations about where you saw your life going, what school you wanted to go to, possibly traveling, possibly going and following a dream that maybe your parents might not have initially thought that, they saw you following. I mean, all of these can bring up a lot of emotions from both parties, and a lot of like, I don't know if I should agree with what you're about to do, or I don't know if I should agree with how you're taking what I'm saying to you, because it looks like you're coming from a space of like animosity or anger or frustration, and all these emotions can come up during those critical conversations. So it's very important to not come from that space, but to recognize the emotions that are there. So that leads us into our next step, which is receptivity, which is such an important integral part in having these conversations and being receptive to the other person, coming from a place of compassion, understanding, realizing that maybe, there are things that you're not completely understanding. Maybe the other person's not clarifying it well enough. Being open to the fact that there might be a lot of emotion riding on this conversation for both parties. So again, it's all about clearing the space and being receptive. Jazzy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. And I want to add a little bit more to the clearing space, is that because I know there are ways in the past that were effective in communicating, and it was around, and we're going to go into this later on about responsibility, but in clearing space, when you clear space, it's being responsible for your emotions and how it's coming up for you and you're in the model of your world, not to project to anyone like, well, because you did this, this is happening. Go in and continue to take responsibility and edify. So for example, like you said, with your parents, or it could be a conflict with a friend or a partner. You said you were going to call me and you didn't. And I kind of waited and you broke that agreement, or, you didn't even bother saying anything. So that's like bringing it up. And then the second thing would be to, what I made up in my mind is that I took it kind of personally, and or you didn't care, or maybe you forgot. I don't know. But moving forward, I just would like to know, like, I would like to create a baseline of like how I can better interact or handle that situation. And then, so that way it kind of gives them it gives you guys that co-creative space to reinvent a new dynamic, because the first one obviously did not work. So clear your space that way. And receptivity, as far as that, is like, how is this making sure that you guys are both in the space of receiving what is heard as information, as neutral data and information. In receptivity, it's like not taking things personally, being impeccable with our word, always doing our best. But at least when you follow that baseline in receptivity, it allows for you guys to be able to flow in the conversation, and just making sure that your tones are in the right place, your energy is in the right place. We're being respectful. Goes back to the intentions, right? Making sure that you're compassionate or love, whatever you are rooted in, just be rooted within that intent, so that way you can carry on a healthy and effective communication. So
100% Jazzy, and I'm glad you said all that. And when you mentioned, recognizing body language, tone of voice, the words that are being used, there are times when these conversations might happen when it's like you say, quote unquote, this is the wrong time for us to have this conversation, or there are a lot of distractions around you and you can't really give the full attention and be an active listener in the moment with that said person. So there's all these things that you just have to kind of, I wouldn't say kind of, but really need to bring forward into your mindset when you're having these critical conversations. Or else things can get lost in translation, as they say. You might take something completely off the wall of whoa, like, this is what I got from that, when in reality, the person was trying to say something else. The body language of a person. I know that for me, when I go into a conversation like this, I really try to look into the person's eyes. Because I've had some conversations where I know the person wasn't necessarily saying what I knew they were feeling. And I will say it from the context of relationships. I've been in situations where I knew that my partner was not being truthful in that moment of having this critical conversation, and I saw it through their eyes. And whether or not that was they were not being honest about their emotions with me, or they were hiding something, you could always tell a lot from a person's eyes. So always make sure eye contact. Always make sure that you are emoting when you speak in these conversations. And that takes us to the fact that we all need to take full responsibility of ourselves in that conversation.
That's a great point. When it comes to finding a means of connection is what I'm hearing you say, like, especially through body language. And what opened up for me as well, what if you were having the conversation over the phone? So what I'd like to add, if that was the case and you were having a critical conversation over the phone, is to check in, like, see, exchange, like, were you feeling how, like, what are your thoughts around that? Being able to go back and forth in a healthy, respectful, inquisitive, curious, and a way that they know that they're heard and you know that you're heard. Find a way to make sure that your guys' needs are met within that conversation. So.
Absolutely. And I love that you said the phone thing, because how many of us have not had an important conversation over the phone? Nowadays, that's a lot of times, we even have important conversations over text. And I've had people say, I didn't get what you just, like, are you angry at me? And I'm like, why? And they're like, well, because your text message seemed like you were angry. And I'm like, I'm not angry at all. I'm sorry if my message to you was short. I absolutely am fine right now. Like, there have been instances where I know, like I said, things get lost in translation. So as Jazzy said, allow yourself to be open, create that space to have that back and forth, and make that time if you can. Now, let's say hypothetically, you don't have time at that moment to have that conversation. Allow yourself to ask the question, is it okay if we can make time at this time to have this conversation later on? Because
can we revisit it? Right.
Yeah, let's revisit this later on. I know myself, I've had to do it a few times, and they appreciate that. It's better to say that than to not be fully present in the moment with that person during that critical conversation. It's better to do it that way. And that leads us into the fact that what it means to take responsibility, responding versus reacting, having that humility in the moment with that person, taking accountability for our actions and our language and our participation for that conversation. A lot of us sometimes come from the space of, you're right, I'm wrong, or it was all your fault, I had nothing to do with it. There's sometimes, and I've admitted, I've had to be humble and realize that I played a role in why this conversation is happening in that moment. Whether it's me not communicating effectively, whether it's me not being honest with that said person, or even if it's me, having certain blockages or barriers that have caused that person to feel a certain way and feel shut out. So I know for myself, Jazzy, would you like to add to that?
Yeah. As you were saying, it's identifying our responsibility and also identifying resistance. It's also our responsibility to recognize that there's resistance. And also to communicate, allow me a moment to process. So you can process and examine those resistances or your thoughts or feelings or emotions around whatever you guys are talking about. And it's also your responsibility to make sure that you're in the right space to have that conversation at that time. If it's a critical conversation, make sure that you have eaten and that you have drank plenty of water. Make sure that that person's in the space to also have done so. And if they refuse, it's just the recipe for disaster. Make sure that you guys are both in the right nourishment space to have that kind of conversation, because emotions take energy and takes mental energy as well. So you want to make sure that you keep those cortisol levels low, so that way it's not reactive, so that way you're responsible for yourself in that moment. And another thing is to be responsible for your language. What are you saying? How are you saying it? Sometimes it's not what you say, but it's how you're saying it, your delivery, and coming from the statement of I statements. And what I mean by I statements is I feel like, I think, my perceptions. Just take ownership instead of creating this blame game. When you did that, or this, or you were being like this, so I did it. It becomes more of attacking. It's choosing violence. We don't want to choose violence here. We're trying to choose love, peace, and reciprocity of the things that we do want in that space, right? So let's make sure that we are fully aware of our patterns, our behaviors, our language, the intentions, our breath, slowing down, recognizing our triggers if they come up, and just like taking a moment to pause. We've shared this before. There is power in the pause. Mm-hmm. And also communicating that you're pausing. This is something opening up. Something's opening up.
Something's opening up. You said to let people know that you're taking that pause. Now, I had a question that just kind of came up, which is, and I've been in the situation before. What if you're in a critical conversation and you ask to have some, let me take a moment to think about this, and you walk away to take a moment? Do you how do you create that space for yourself to think without causing the other person to feel like you just turned your back and nothing really happened? How do you create that space enough and really allow that other person to realize she just needed some time to think about it?
I feel like it's just being truthful and authentic with yourself and being respectful when it comes to that moment. Like, allow me this time. I need about 5 minutes to process. My emotions are heightened and I just need to breathe and step away. Some people pace, some people, we all go through processes differently. And remember this, that their urgency is not your responsibility. And your urgency is not their responsibility. So as responsible beings of ourselves, we should be able to respect our process and their process. So if we need to allow someone that time, give them that time. Ask if they need that time to go through it a bit. The whole point is we're working our way to become more emotionally intelligent, to be aware of ourselves and the others that we interact with.
Absolutely.
So give yourself that permission to step away if you need to. I know that I want to touch on later when it comes to attachment styles, but sometimes there's anxious and there's avoidant. But if we can continue flowing and allowing ourselves to flow, releasing that resistance and allowing ourselves to lean into discomfort, to go into the zones that allow us to be different types of people in a way that we can have these types of conversations.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, Jazzy, because I know myself and others out there who've been in that situation where they just needed a step away. And then the other person might have felt triggered in some way, that the other person wasn't listening, or the other person wasn't, registering or something, I know it can be something that can be difficult to do. but I'm glad that you said that. And also another question, what if, and I'm just gonna put this out there, you're in a conversation with somebody and you're feeling bulldozed in the conversation?
Oof.
How would one deal with that? Or how would one work through that? Because yeah, I'm sure I myself included have had that happen.
Yeah. And this is something that I've also experienced as well, when I can recognize that I'm processing the information and then I'm processing someone else's emotions and it feels like they're coming at me. So I feel like the best way is to like I said, allow that person to know that I need a moment to process, or right now I feel like this is no longer a safe space to have this conversation. So I feel like we could either recalibrate together, find some place of where we can reconnect. Um, Even in this moment, time and space, we can reconnect and have it here, or we can revisit this when the emotions aren't as heightened and go back into it, knowing that we are co-creating a safe space. Because I'd like to have this conversation. I just don't feel like this is a place where I'm being respected, heard, seen, felt, or my intentions or the intentions we both set are not being met. So effective communication sometimes does take a lot of talking, but it's being clear, self-aware, and just conscientious of where you're at, where a person's at, and where the dynamic is at. Because you have to make a healthy decision. And if one person is kind of tilting the scale a bit, allow yourself to stay grounded. Because it's sometimes some people don't even realize that they're bulldozing because they're so full of emotions. And then sometimes when we give them that, put that pause on them, they can kind of allow themselves to recenter. And you can create a new door of opportunity by just setting a healthy boundary.
And speaking of healthy boundaries, that's for those out there who want to know more about what it means to create a healthy boundary versus unhealthy boundaries.
Yes.
What is Jazzy? What is the difference?
Oh, I feel like you'd actually you shared something really brilliant earlier when it came to unhealthy boundary, but healthy boundaries is I'll go into that, which is what is that? Tip number 5. And that is setting the space where you know that you can continue having that conversation at another time, whether it be just letting them know this is past this the space of safety, or letting them know your boundaries are supposed to keep you from going overboard or overreacting. So make sure, or having a situation escalate. So the boundaries put in place are supposed to be to help everyone just maintain a respectful and healthy space. So
absolutely. And yes, Jazzy, in terms of unhealthy boundaries. So as we mentioned, that's tip number 5 of knowing when you're creating healthy boundaries and unhealthy ones. So in a critical conversation, an unhealthy boundary would be, let's say you're creating a blockage towards communication, or you're creating or you put up a wall towards being fully present, or allowing your real emotions, the truth to come out. Because when you set those walls and those boundaries up, and that also includes being avoidant. And I've had a couple of people walk away from critical conversations. All different ways that people create those unhealthy boundaries at times where, it doesn't allow the conversation to flow and or to come to some sort of agreement. And whether the agreement is, I agree to disagree, which I've heard before, it is still, it still ends in a result. When you create an unhealthy boundary, it's like you're putting a stop. It's like you're putting a plug on allowing things to just flow in the relationship. And the more you do that, the more it builds up until eventually somebody feels like they are not being heard, somebody feels like they're not being listened to, somebody feels like they are not a partner in that relationship. And that leads to trouble. So don't put up unhealthy boundaries if you want to have a critical conversation with someone.
Yeah, be careful of those walls, because there is a fine line of when a conversation can escalate to a certain level where we're uncomfortable, or maybe there's a lot of emotions coming out. And then there's the fine line of the unhealthy boundary where you completely shut down. But even if you find yourself like shutting down, because I know that I found myself shutting down in what seems to be as an, it can come off to the other person as an unhealthy boundary. But being communicative, even in your processing, is so important. Of like, I know I might not have the words right now. I know I might not be able to finish this conversation as you'd like. But I do intend to come back to it. I'm going to think on it. I'd like to just letting them in, just still reaffirming the teamwork and the connection, and reaffirming just where you're at. So that way the boundary does not have to be unhealthy.
I love it. Oh my God, Jazzy, thank you for saying that, because it is so important, again, for us to communicate that we will revisit this soon. It's not because I'm not thinking about you. It's not because you're not important. It's not because this isn't important to me, but we will revisit this at a later time. Let me have some time to think about it. And then, of course, later on, the emotions aren't as heightened and you guys can come back to that conversation. So, Jazzy, thank you for explaining that. And that goes into, the whole idea of taking, like we mentioned, accountability for the fact that if this person in this conversation is important to you, if the relationship is important to you, be open to allowing it to flow and communicate. Be honest. If something isn't working, say it. If you need time and space, say it. But say it, come from a place of love and compassion for the other person. Yeah.
And be patient. Be patient and just be a good person. Be a good person by being kind. And also just remember to be kind to yourself. Sometimes in conversations, they could be pretty rough and they can feel very strenuous, but they don't have to. You can definitely find a way to calm your nervous system. And that's another thing is what I guess this can go under like responsibility or just overall regulating your nervous system, because sometimes when emotions are dysregulated, you'll see it in the other person, you'll see it in yourself, but allow that moment to be very intentional to find a way to ground and recalibrate, because you can either be choosing peace or you can be choosing violence. So when you feel like there's some sort of resistance or some sort of like hostility, violence, chaos, disconnection, ground yourself, or even announce, between the two of you, like, I feel like we both should ground, or maybe can we both take this moment together to ground? Can we just come back to what it is that we are here to do,
Absolutely.
whether that's an agreement or disagreement. So
Love it.
and last but not least, be open to feedback.
Oof. And can I say that particular one is something that I've learned to practice more as a result of the leadership course that I took with Jazzy and the Lotus Ladies, because it is something that I know has to be practiced. It's not something that you just wake up one morning and you're like, yeah, I can do it. No. And it really has humbled me to take that feedback as a form of positivity and growth. Because sometimes we take feedback and we might get, as Jazzy mentioned in the beginning, we might get hurt, take it personal. But what if that feedback you're being given is something that can actually help you grow? And recently, I will say that has been 100% what I have really been taking in regards to my relationship with significant others. I have somebody who's been really vocal about certain things that I know that I myself need to work on with regards to being in relationship with others. And before, I might have been somebody who's like, whoa, like, no, like, everything's fine. Like, how could anybody not want to be in a relationship with X, Y, Z? You kind of get a little defensive, but in the end, you realize, you know what? Okay, I get it. There are certain things that I need to do a little better. And there are certain parts of myself that I need to realize might be hindering me having closer, richer, more mature relationships with others. And to all of you out there who have struggled with regards to taking feedback, trust me, the minute that you take that feedback and turn it into a positive as a way for you to grow, whether it's somebody saying something like, for example, oh, you're this and that, and da-da-da-da. Well, turn it and realize that, you are a powerful, empowered, beautiful being who's on the road to improvement every single day. It's a journey. It's not something that's going to happen tomorrow where you're going to be the most perfect person, because there really is no perfection. Jazzy, what are your thoughts on that?
I wanted to kind of go into if somebody was saying something to the effect of you're being XYZ. First of all, I would say that person might be projecting. So the moment that someone's saying you are, I would kind of take what their comments are with a grain of salt, because a lot of the things that people will point out are things that they don't like within themselves.
Boom. I love you said that.
And just like there are the things that are good, there are also those the things that they see within themselves. But if someone comes at you with you are or your being, whichever, take that with a grain of salt. But I wanted to elaborate a little bit for those who might not know what feedback is. So, and how to give it actually, to set the example in your interactions would probably, it comes to the effect of my experience of you is, or my experience of how you're showing up, or it's taking accountability for what you're experiencing. So it allows that person like, wow, you become a mirror at that point. It's not an attack. You become a loving, gentle, respectful mirror that allows that opportunity for another person to actually make the conscious effort to elevate from that. Oh, okay, this is how I'm coming off. So, but if you created a healthy dynamic with someone and they've given you feedback, like, what I've observed in you is that you're, I've been noticing how you are, it's just an observation. They're coming from an observation standpoint rather than an evaluation standpoint. And when you hear that feedback, it allows for you to make the conscious choice of, oh, okay. You take yourself out of the personal space and look at it objectively. And once you can look at situation objectively, you can make more sound, logical, and loving decisions from that space. So the feedback, there's never like failure in feedback. The feedback is meant for you to grow. It's the opportunity for you to be able to elevate your situation and just the way that you navigate. So be open to that love.
Yes. And I just want to put it out there too, because there is a difference between feedback and feeling bullied.
Right.
And I'm glad that you clarify what feedback is, because when you're being bullied, it's completely different. And that's, people who are bringing you down, making you feel small, making you feel like you're inadequate, making you feel
guilt tripping you,
making you feel like you're not enough, making you feel like you're not unworthy. All these things come up when it comes to a bully, you know, going out there, because that's their goal. Their goal is to bring people down in whatever way, shape, or form, in any relationship. And, you know, it's something that is not healthy for anyone to be doing and for anyone to be receiving. So if you're out there and you are on the receiving end, know that we support you and we're here for you. And we think that you're amazing and wonderful beings. And if you are the one who knows somebody who does this, know that it is not something they should be doing, and definitely, you know, speak out when those things happen. Feedback is completely different. As Jazzy mentioned, it allows for growth. It allows for you to really improve in aspects of yourself, in your life. The other thing is just unhealthy and should not be done. So we wanted to make sure you knew that there was a difference.
What came up for me when you said bullying was sometimes as adults, I feel like the bullies are actually covert narcissists, but that's for another topic.
Yes, that's definitely a big topic that we'll definitely revisit. Yes. So Jazzy, do you have any closing remarks today for this wonderful conversation we've had about having critical conversations and defining healthy and healthy boundaries, what feedback and bullying and that type of criticism is? So many great points today.
I have one thing that I want to leave with you guys. So around this conversation today, I've actually created a map that I will share. If anything, you can take a screenshot of it. It's a mind map of dealing with conflict. So there's a lot of the points that we talked about today. And if you want us to go into details, we definitely will. And if you like what we talked about, please like, share, and subscribe. Make sure that you get our notifications. So that way you are up to date with what's coming up. Because who knows, like if you're in alignment with this message, you might be in alignment with the next videos that any one of us come up with. There's Zian and Laura and Miss Tilla and Miss Jen and I that are always here for you guys. We are building a community of individuals who are empowered to lead a life of transforming their daily lives and the way that we interact with the rest of the world. So we encourage you to share your thoughts. We love to hear from you. And let's get a conversation going. Let's talk about these things. Say something in the comments, or you can go ahead and just send us an email, lotuschatworldwide@gmail.com. I'm so glad to have been with you guys tonight. Looking forward to doing another topic soon. And till next time.
Till next time. We love you guys. Thank you.
Bye.